Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. So in today's tutorial, we are going to be learning about top 5 mistakes to avoid while making mandala patterns. So you always have the perfect symmetrical patterns each time. So for today's tutorial, I will be using this Vivid Trails grid notebook in the cover, the geometric mandala, but you can go ahead and choose any other different covers or the number of pages of the grid notebooks that you like. Along with it, I'm going to be using the Brewster fine liners. Now you can check out the description box below. The links to these materials are given over there attached with a coupon code so that you go ahead and get a little bit of discount on your purchase. So definitely go ahead and check out because we have numerous ranges for this grid notebook collection and which you do not want to miss out. Now getting started, we are going to be understanding a bit about the patterns as well as top 5 mistakes to avoid while we are making them. Now I have opened up a clean fresh page of my grid notebook and the grid boxes are 5 into 5 mm. The reason first and foremost that I'm using a grid notebook is the first mistake that is something that we definitely need to avoid while we are making mandala patterns. Now the mandala patterns are all about symmetry, right? And if we go ahead and do it freehand, the symmetry might hamper. Okay, so let's see how it goes. So the number one mistake that you need to avoid is do not go freehand. Okay, now this is something that I prefer. It's nothing mandatory. The reason I prefer that not to go freehand is that mandala is all about symmetry and balance and uniformity. So in case you are going ahead with freehand, there is a lot of possibilities for you to not achieve that portion of symmetry and uniformity. So it's always preferable to use the grids over here, be it a mandala grid or a boxed or square grid like this. Okay, so do not go freehand because once we are not having any kind of shape, we just try to go for as something like this. Okay, and we can make a pattern something like this and we are going with the detail. Right, now you may feel that it is symmetrical to you, right? But when you take up a pencil and you go ahead and divide it from the mid half like this, from this tip or the mid half, you will figure out that this area and this area are not same. This is compared to this one more smaller and this one is quite bigger. Also, if you see the curve of the angle, this is something like this, while this is a bit more curved, right? So these are the things that you have to face if you go free-handedly. Okay, so this might come up that it's not symmetrical, and while you're making in a mandala, it might happen that you are getting the circle somewhat like this, and the pattern shape or the number of pattern shape here is 5 and the number of pattern shape here is 6. So this is something that also happens in case you're going free-handed because you're not getting the equal number when you're dividing the circle half or maybe another half horizontally as well. So you're not getting equal number of pattern shapes in each of the sides of the circle or the portions of the circles. And again, like we had discussed, this is something that absolutely comes up. Okay, another thing in this point is that whenever if we are using grids, do not use odd numbers. Okay, now what do I mean by do not use odd numbers? Okay, so whenever we are using the grids, supposedly we might go ahead and just taking out the pencil and we are going for using 1 2 3 and 1 2 3 vertically. Sorry, my mistake, let me just erase it. So we are going like this, 1 2 and 3. So vertically 3 and horizontally 3. Okay, specifically do not use odd numbers in case horizontally. Mostly horizontally we are never going to use it. Okay, why so? Because if we go ahead and use it horizontally, what is going to be happening is that we are never getting the midpoint. So we have to assume in between this 2 and this is the midpoint for our pattern shape, something like this, right? And again, what might happen that you are never getting the exact midpoint here. Even if you mark it out beforehand, you are putting a lot of effort to get the midpoint, and you do not even have the midpoint passing through here as well to again make this half your detailing and this half of your detailing absolutely symmetrical. Okay, so this is something that you will face if you're going for odd numbers in this form. So what we do is we always try to use even numbers. Okay, how? So whenever we are going ahead with our pattern shapes, the length or the vertical wise, you might choose any number. It can be odd or even. So let me show you with odd only so you're more clarified. So here we are going to go for even number, which is 4. So this between 2 and 3 is my midpoint, which is I'm getting. And when I go ahead and make my pattern shape, it can be any big or small pattern shape, I always come up with this midline. So whenever I'm adding any detailing here, it will always be symmetrical on the right side as well as the leftward side. Something like this. Even for my mid petal that I'm going, it's perfectly symmetrical. See? So here also on the leftward side, I can add 2 of the petal in exact same form, and I'm leaving exact same number of space or gappings exactly as the right as well as the leftward side. So this is something that you need to be aware about. Okay, so whatever you do on your rightward side or on your leftward side, you have to replicate the same to make the pattern look symmetrical as well as neat and more constrained and more interesting, right? So this is the number one mistake to avoid when you're going for making the mandala patterns. Next, coming up to the next mistake that is to avoid is not adding a breathing space or, in simplified words, a double outlining. Okay, so in simplified words, not adding a breathing space means not adding a double outlining. Now you might had the question about here why I'm going for repeating the same shape inside of it without just directly going for adding the detailing. So this is the number 2 mistake that is most commonly done, but it is something that you absolutely need to avoid to make your mandala look more neat, more clean, as well as to give the opportunity to your pattern shapes as well as detailings to be or stand out or to be individual. Okay, so what is something that usually happens when we are creating a pattern shape? Suppose something like this. So we are going in a repetitive form, right? So this is the wrong procedure that we are going to follow, and this is the right procedure that we are going to be following. Okay, now breathing space is basically leaving a bit of gap so that our eyes can focus into what is inside of a certain area. Okay, like in school we used to go ahead and add the marginal lines, remember? So like that exactly, to make our eyes or the viewers eyes or our audience's eyes focus inside of it, this is something that is absolutely needed. So when you are looking at very number of repetitive patterns all throughout a mandala, to make them stand out, we have to add this breathing space. So I'll just show you in a simple way. So here I'm adding the detailings directly. So I'm just adding a midline and tilted lines on one half. I'm going for a little highlight and filling off the remaining space on this half. Okay, so this is the detailing I'm choosing. Nothing very complex, very simple. Now, when you look at it in a repetitive form, what do you first notice? Okay, you can just look away and look right back in. And the first thing that you will notice is this black detailing and this line detailing. You do not notice the shape at all. It's just the inside detailing. And when you look very closely, it's that shape that is popping up. But when you go ahead and just add maybe a little bit of thin margin line or a little bit of giving it a breathing space, something like this, and then you go ahead and add an exact same kind of detailing, though the detailing space might lower up, which is something that you might not prefer, But what will happen is when you look at it, you will first notice the pattern shape, and then you will focus on the inside of the detailing, which is more prominent and doesn't look clumsy. So each of the pattern shape here stands out and is not lost between the repetitive shapes. This is something, another top mistake that most commonly people make, but this is something that you can avoid and make your mandala look more prominent, more clean, and make your pattern stand out while you're working with repetitive patterns. Alright, let's move on to the number 3 mistake that we usually make. Okay, so till here I have been using the 0.4 mm tip size. Okay, the 0.4 mm tip size. So whenever we go ahead and do not just use a single bold tip or a single if not bold, a thin tip. Okay, any singular tip I'm suggesting not to use. Specifically the bold, let's get into the reason. Here is somewhat visible. Okay, so when we go ahead and just use a single bold tip, so I'm going for taking up a pattern shape, which is this shape. Again, going for double outlining, and I'm going for then adding maybe a midline, adding a swirl using this grid, adding just a circle on top, and maybe on this half I'm adding up 2 petals, however it could be added like this, right? And just a little bit detail. Now for this I have only used the 0.4 mm tip size, right? Now whenever you go ahead and use more number of tip sizes and you go for variations and you try not to just use a single bold tip, what happens? So here I am using the 0.4 mm. Along with it I will be using the 0.1 mm. Okay, how does it would make a difference? Suppose if I'm going for the exact same detailing and the shape, so I'll start with the outer shape using the bold tip. I'm going to keep it aside and take up my thin tip and go for rest of the detailings with my thin tip. Now whenever you are done with double outlining only, you will see the contrast over here present between the outer line as well as the inner line, whereas there is no contrast here, right? Whenever I'm adding the detailing, supposedly I just add the same detailing, going for the spiral. I could go a little bit more inside because of the thin tip, and when I'm adding the circle, here I have a little bit more space available than what I had here, so I can go ahead and add another extra element or another smaller circle, something like this. And here on the leftward side I can add 1 petal, maybe 2, and maybe the third one like this. And then also I can go ahead and add my lines inside of my petal. Okay, so what happens when you're going for a thick and thin tip, you come up with more space. Number one, you come up with, let's go upside first and foremost, the contrast between the thick and the thin, and number 3 is you come up with more intricacy, which is not something possible if you go ahead with just the bold tip, because with the tip, the bold tip, what is happening is it's taking up a lot more space, while with a thinner tip, with for the detailing, it takes up a little less space, giving you more availability of space to add more intricacy as well as create a fine contrast between your thick outer shape as well as thin inner detailing. Alright, so I guess we are done with the top 3 mistakes to avoid. Let's dive into the remaining 2. Now for this grid notebooks, the another thing that I really love, that these are 100 GSM papers and they are smooth papers and they are completely bleed through. So we had done it on this half of my paper, and you can see that there is nothing such visible here. There is no smudging or bleeding to this side, and it's perfectly safe to use this side as well. So you can make use of both the sides of paper and reduce the number of wastage of papers. That is something which is a very problematic issue right now in our world. Okay, so this is something that I'd really prefer, that even if you go ahead and put maximum pressure to your fine liners, it's still usable and there is no smudging. So coming to the next one, which is our fourth mistake to avoid, is going ahead and leaving huge gaps. Okay, now you might be a little bit confused here. What is leaving huge gaps, okay, in pattern detailings or pattern shapes? I'll just guide you through. So suppose I have a pattern shape, okay, like this, and simultaneously I'll keep another pattern shape side by side. So one right, one wrong, right? Now again we'll go ahead and use two tips, and okay, so once I'm done with the outlining, I'm just going to keep my 0.4 mm side, go with the thinner tip. Now usually what happens that we go ahead and do is, after putting in all of the efforts in creating the double outlining and everything, we go ahead and add the detailing something in a bit of different manner. So suppose if I'm adding the spiral, I go for making a very small spiral, not touching the double outlining, even my petal, something like this, and I'm leaving a lot of space outside, which I have to go ahead and fill it up, something like this. And what happens then is, number one thing, that I do not have much space left to go ahead and add the lines here. It is looking cramped up, and because of such dark outlining or such filling of space or the remaining white space with black, it is looking very small, it's not looking much intricate, and it's looking very bold or very dark. Whereas whenever I go ahead and do the detailings, make sure you're touching this double outlining, taking up as much space as possible, making your pattern shapes more broader and bigger, and touching the double outlinings like this, so that you have a little bit of space left to fill the remaining white spaces, and your pattern detailings look more bold, more prominent, and doesn't look very dark. Okay, so this is the number 4 mistake. Again, a huge mistake that people make is not touching the elements or the detailings to the double outlining and leaving a huge lot of space to completely go ahead and black fill. Okay, so this is something that you can avoid to not make your mandala or your patterns look very dark, very bold, rather giving it the perfect amount of balance of boldness and the lightness, and making your intricate detailings pop out more. Now coming to the last, and again the most common mistake that people make, is filling with too many elements. Okay, now what do you mean that filling with too many elements? Whenever I go ahead and make a pattern shape, suppose if it's this pattern shape, which is using 2 into 2 grid boxes, or even if it's 1, 2, 3 and 4, a bigger pattern shape using more number of grid boxes. And this is something it's more preferable, is to number your grid so that you are always getting the perfect symmetrical pattern shapes, right? I'm just switching again to my thinner fine liner, the same way, adding the double outlining, remembering all of my detailings or the mistakes that I should avoid. Like this, right? Now, what happens if I go ahead and fill this and this with the same number of elements? Either you're filling too many or maybe too less. Okay, it can be anything. You have to find the perfect balance of adding the detailings to the size availability of the pattern shape. Okay, you cannot go ahead and add maybe one spiral here, and then adding one petal alongside, maybe two, and then maybe going ahead and adding that another swirl from this side like this, and maybe adding little circle like this. Okay, it's unbalanced. You have used more number of elements here, which is not needed. Another thing that people usually do is whenever they are making such kind of pattern shape is they go ahead, create the pattern shape, and to make it look more intricate, what do is they go ahead with very narrow kind of detail, narrow kind of petals, something like this, so that I can go ahead and add more petals, something like this. Okay, so here I am able to add more petals, remaining all of like maintaining all of the mistakes to avoid. But what happens is simultaneously, I'm not saying this is wrong, but this is something that I don't prefer, is whenever you're going ahead and making the petals look more broader and more prominent, it just enhances the detailing a lot more. Okay, so while here on the upper one I had added 1, 2, 3 and 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 7 kind of like one mid petal and 3 on the either side. What I can do is I can go ahead and make the mid petal a bit broad and the side petals also a bit broader. So I can just add 2.5 on either side. Okay, now you may think, okay, this looks more intricate and this looks more bold and broader, right? What you can do is to make or increase the intricacy, try and go up with little bit more number of elements rather than jotting down too much of it in one place. So what I can do is I can go for a line and dot to make it look more intricate rather than just going with too many of the petals and not making it stand out. So this looks simultaneously more intricate than compared to this one because it's very petite and very narrow. Another mistake that people make at in small place, suppose if I have a place something which is of the 4x4 grid box, they tend to add too much of any detail. So they tend to add maybe one petal here, mid petal, again narrow, and then also in this area they go ahead and add two circles. Here also they go ahead and add one little spiral, and here above it again more circles, something like this. What happens that whenever you're adding too much of element into a smaller detailing, it just pushes or makes your pattern look intricate but more clumsy. Okay, so it results in more clumsiness. Okay, whenever you're adding too much of it. Okay, whereas whenever you're not adding too much of it, it makes it look blank. How? So like we had discussed, we are going to go with something like this inside of here as well. So when I'm going for this one, I'll go for exactly trying to replicate this like this. Again, petals. I have to go ahead for broader petals because I have to maintain the other mistakes to avoid, which is not touching the double outlining. And if I'm doing that, what is happening is my pattern detailing looks very blank, very bold, and even if I add this linings and I fill up the remaining space, it will not come up intricate, it will come up bold and it will come up very blank because you just have few elements. So whenever you're choosing, this is the balance you have to get right, is in small shapes go for lesser elements, for bigger shapes or big shapes go for more elements. This way you will be able to find the perfect balance inside of a smaller shape than compared to a bigger shape. So suppose I have the bigger shape which is something like this. I'm going for a little smaller number of going for 3 vertical grids and 4 horizontal grids. Alright, so if I have a big or a broader shape, I'm going to go ahead and use the same fine liner tip sizes, the 0.4 mm and the 0.1 mm. We are not going to go for bolder tip only because it's a broader shape. And what I'm going to do is, suppose I'm going to go ahead and add a midline. So I'm just dividing my space into two halves. I'm going to go ahead maybe and add a spiral from the mid half just using this grid. And I'm going to go ahead and add maybe half of the mid petal and then the side petal, something like this. as many as it fits, and maybe a little circle. Fill up the remaining white spaces. The petals are neither too narrow, neither too broad. Just make it look more intricate with a line and a dot. On the other half, I'm going to go ahead and again maybe divide it with the help of this line. Again, I'll just add a double outlining here, and I'm going to again go for maybe just adding a long semi-half paisley, something like this. Little circle on top. Again, double outlining my semi-half paisley so that because it's a broader shape, and I'm going to go ahead and add hatching to it. And for the final one, I can just go with very simple detailing because it doesn't have much of a space. So 3 circles which are neither too small neither too big, and here I'm done filling up the space. So you can already compare to this one, you can see how more filled it is, how more intricate this look, and this looks very blank. So these were the top 5 mistakes that you should avoid while you're making your mandala patterns. Whenever you're making any mandala patterns, be it in a circular mandala or a square mandala or any pattern practice that you are doing, make sure you are keeping all of these in mind so that you are getting the perfect patterns each time. So hope you liked this video. If you are finding this helpful, do let us know in the comment section. Make sure you stay subscribed to our channel for more such art tutorials because we come up with art tutorials every Monday. And make sure you hit the like button if you liked our video so that we are able to come up with more such art tutorials each and every time. So it was all for today. I'll see you next time. Till then, keep on creating.